Welcome to today's user group refresher session titled, What the Heck is Expected Value and How Can We Use It? So today we're going to go into a concept that's a little more advanced, but that's used extensively in our work in two areas. One is major giving officer staff performance management, and the other is targeting campaign ask areas. So the idea here is you put a monetary value on each prospect, and that's calculated from a combination of some capacity rating score, which can be acquired from a wealth engine screening organization, or it can be predictive modeling can be used to mine your own internal data to get at it. We usually recommend going outside for capacity scores. And there's another factor, which is an affinity or an attachment score, and the two together can be used to calculate a value for each prospect. We'll see that in a few minutes, how we actually calculate it. Then on the major giving officer staff performance side, you want to look at the value of the proposals an officer has out and compare it to the sort of the sum of the capacity expectation of the pool. So if somebody's got $10 million in proposals, that could be really good. If he has the lower rated prospects that are worth 5 or 6 million, that's a good coverage ratio. On the other hand, if he or she has all the top-rated prospects and should have 70 million on the street and only has 10, there's an awful lot of money being left off the table. So that's the idea, it's to take the 10 million pool and normalize it based on the value of the prospects that the officer has. The other places can be used if you are sizing ask areas for a campaign. Say you've got trying to raise money for a neuroscience center, and you're also raising money maybe for a sports facility, say a new soccer field. And you could go through and mine the data to find everybody who had a biology or a neuroscience degree and works in medicine and so forth. And then if you had an expected value on each prospect, it would total and say, hey, the neuroscience facility looks like we have the capacity to raise $70 million. And you could go to the soccer and look at everybody who played soccer or maybe has expressed an interest in soccer, and maybe that's worth $20 million. So now you've had some rough idea for how much each group could possibly be worth. And as you know, with advisors, it's really easy to cut the list different ways. So once you have this expected value, there's a couple of key things you can do with it. So let's take a look at it. We're going to focus on major giving staff performance management for most of this. So when we do this work, there's a series of metrics we look at, and these are used as coaching tools. So as I go through this, the idea here is this is not hard and fast. These are metrics to draw out stories to start discussions that can be used to help people do better. And this is caveated per development officer, hypothetical, so it's a best practices from a number of our clients. And after first year ramp up, and it's a higher ed focus, so membership-based organizations and whatnot will vary. But generally, each major giving officer should have a pool of 400 or 600 suspects, and usually this is managed by prospect research or prospect management, and he or she is assigned 100 to 150 active prospects. And as a prospect gets developed, he or she may move down this stack and actually become a proposal and then a closed and go into stewardship, or maybe they're not ready, so the active prospect will go back into the suspect pool. So there's a flow here. And then in general, each gift officer has the capacity to do 75 to 120 in-person visits a year. I mean, some people try to do more, less than that. Another concept that's coming up, if it can be tracked, and some of our clients are doing it, is the concept of a meaningful contact. So as that data comes in, the in-person visit may be a meaningful phone call or an email could be counted as well. But there's some measure here of how much you're getting out into the pool and interacting. Then there's another thing we look at, which is penetration. So if you have 100 people and you've made 75 in-person visits, but they've all been with a handful of high-rated prospects, you could have a low penetration, meaning that of the 100 people, you've only interacted with 20 of them. That's a 20% penetration. You want to see these visits with the right people to drive the high donors across, but also you want to see coverage of the whole pool. And then so if you have 100 to 150 active prospects are being managed well, you should be able to get 25 active proposals at a time. And these are, you're going to get them out, and some are going to close and go back here, decline. Some of them will accept and become closed down here. But this is sort of a reasonable ratio. The next thing we want to look at is ask versus expected value. So you have these 25 proposals, which is about maybe a quarter of your active prospects. How are you doing on the ask versus the expected value? And we'd like to see, we'll see the details on this, but we'd like to see a 2 to 3 times proposal pool coverage ratio, which is back to that example at the beginning. Is $10 million of proposals good or bad? I don't know. It depends upon who I have in my pool that I'm raising money from. And then if you have a close ratio of 1 and 2, 1 and 3, if you have 25 active proposals, you should be able to close 8 to 10 proposals in a fiscal year per development officer, and then that's your revenue. So these are the kinds of metrics we look at. I'm going to drill in now on this ask versus expected value. So first, a couple of definitions. In ask, we mean the dollar value of the issued proposals. And some of these issued can vary depending on whether it's a verbal or where it is in development or whether it's written. So the idea here is these are what I'm getting out in the fiscal year. I'm putting out, $10 million this year, and we'll leave that term a little bit loose for now. Expected value is how much is a prospect, an individual, or a household worth. And again, definition of individual household varies by client, but there's 2 uses for the expected value. One is the ask to this person in line with the capacity? We're going to look at the ask versus the expected value. I'm asking $5 million. This person has an expected value of $500,000. My ask looks high. I'm asking $5 million. My expected value is $30 million. My ask looks low. Same ask, different expected value, different discussion. The other one was for the group of prospects. How much might I be able to raise from them over, say, 7 years? There's another concept with the expected value, which is the current year expected value, because this calculates how much a prospect should be able to give, $5 million. But on average, they don't give it all in 1 year. They give it over, say, 7 years. So the current year expected value says if I have a pool of these $5 million donors, I have one of them and they make a gift, hopefully it's $5 million. If I have 10 of them, somebody's going to make a gift this year, 2 are going to make a gift next year, and so forth. So on average, if I have 10 of them, my 10 at $5 million will be a $50 million expected value pool, but I'm only expecting to get 1/7 of that, or roughly $7 million each year. So when you're looking at a pool, if I have 100 prospects, I don't propose to all of them every year. So I need this other concept of, okay, my pool's worth $50 million, but this year I expect to get $7 million out of it. So I want to see the sum of my asks, 2 to 3 coverage ratio versus this current year expected value. And then when I go to ask, if the guy's, the expected value for the prospect is $5 million, I ought to be in that range and have a discussion about it. So that's the concepts here. Now let's look at how we calculate them. This is a shortened pool, but John Smith is the prospect manager. He has a group of about 10 prospects here: Jim Major, Sue Johnson, Joe Monkey. He's planning to ask, or has asked, $1 million to Jim, $100,000 to Sue, $50,000 to Mary. So his total ask pool is $1.15 million. Now, each of these prospects are rated. In this case, the high rating might be an A1, then A3, B is a C, a D is a lower rating, and F is a really low rating. And again, you can calculate these out of internal data. We really recommend getting these from a wealth screening organization, which look at outside assets and all that stuff. And each of these ratings can be put in ranges, and usually the wealth screening gives you that. They give you a handle like an A1, but that means 10 million or up. An A3 means 1 to 10 million. A B is 500,000 to $1 million, and so forth. So this is typically, these 2 columns are what you'll get from a wealth screening agency. And in our world, they would come in and just be extra columns in the prospect data table, and we'd have these. So then an advisor, what we need to do is calculate a number, a dollar amount that Jim Major has the capacity for. And so we use the expression builder. There was another user group refresher on that. and we literally would take the range, and generally if there's a range like 1 to 10 million, we've worked with a number of consultants. Martz and Lundy would be one, and some of the others. We generally recommend taking the capacity number to be about a third of the way up into the range, because there's a skew. Most of this range is at the bottom, and there's less at the top, so you don't want to go in the middle. You want to go like about a third of the way up. So 1 to 10, we call it 3 million. 500 to a million, 650, and so forth. 10 million plus, 14 million. So we just use the expression builder. If the rating is A1, the capacity is 14 million. If the rating is A3, it's 3 million. Just a formula that adds this extra column in. So that's how we monetize the capacity. The next thing is the wealth screening engines come in with what's called an affinity score. It might be an attachment score. I think Blackbaud has something called an RFML score, and they generally run from strong, meaning there's a lot of participation in events. The person really likes the school. Their son got admitted, and it's now they're a legacy. All of this stuff. The 9 is the other end. They've never come to any reunions. Their son didn't get admitted, so the father's mad. So the issue here is this is how much the prospect has the capacity for. The affinity gives you a sense of the degree that they're likely to give that to your organization versus something else. So in the expression builder, we translate the affinity scores into the affinity rankings or the attachment rankings into a score. And generally, a strong affinity or attachment would be a 0.33 factor, meaning that if their capacity is 14 million, you'd expect them to give about a third of it to your organization. If it's really low, like a 9, a couple percent, 2, 3%. So these numbers, the scores generally range from about a third to a couple percent. And this is important because you're not going to get the amount out of the person if they've got a low affinity score. You might get some somewhat de minimis amount, but you're certainly not going to get a big chunk of their potential capacity donated to your organization. So, we calculate another if-then statement. If the affinity score is 1.33 if the affinity ranking is 1.33 for the score, if it's 9.03 and so forth. And again, these things come in all kinds of flavors, but they all range from something high, which ought to be ranked about a third, to something low, which ought to be a few percent. If you don't have affinity or attachment scores, our advisors' predictive modeling tools could be used to take alumni event participation, reunions, click-throughs and newsletters. There's a bunch of opt-in affinity and attachment stuff that could be used to get at these scores. So there's ways of calculating them. But again, the wealth screening companies do this, and we just would recommend going with one of them to get it. So next thing you do is you multiply the capacity by the score, and that's the expected value. So in this case, Jim Major has a capacity rating of A1, so he's worth $14 million, an affinity ranking of 1, which is high, so he gets a score of 0.3. So his expected value is 4.6 million, which means if you're looking at a campaign, you would want to look at him for $4.6 million, assuming these numbers are right. In this case, John Smith is asking $1 million, so that looks a little low. The next one, it's an A3, which is $3 million. It's a 5.15, 450. Asking him $100,000, that looks a little low. Here's another one. The next ask, Mary Morgan, we're asking $50,000. It's looks like the rating is pretty good. It's a B, which is a 500 million, but there's a really low affinity score, 0.03. So that expected value is 19.5. This looks a little high. So when you're evaluating, that's how you would use it. Now I'm just going to move the column over. Just move the expected value over next to the ask so you can sort of see them side by side and total them. Now the problem here is back to the beginning discussion. You can't compare, the ask that you've made to 3 people against the expected value of the whole pool of 10. That's a kind of a meaningless number because this pool doesn't do this every year. This pool does this over an average of 7 years. So here's where that other current year expected value comes in. I just divided all of these by 7, which gave me a current year pool value of $1.3 million, which I compare with my $1.15 million. I'm about a 1x coverage ratio. this ought to be higher. This ought to be more in the range of 2 or 3 million. I'd be happier with it, because looking at close ratios, this is what I think I should get. This should ideally be higher. So that's how that discussion would go. Now, one last thing on the current year expected value. In this case, we divided by 7. We have some of the wealth screening groups will create what's called a capacity or a liquidity score. And a liquidity score will run from highly liquid, they just sold their business and have a lot of cash. The other one would be not liquid. They have a private business, but there's no action on it, so all their net worth's tied up. And so the liquidity scores usually run high, medium, low, or plus, neutral, minus. If you have those, the high, generally instead of dividing by 7, you divide by 2 or 3, because they're likely to, you can get that capacity out pretty quick. If they're a liquid, you want to divide by 15 to 20. And then, the middle range, 7 to 8. So what we did here, we didn't have any liquidity indices, so we just divided everybody by 7. But if you had it, you could create some more gradation here. I mean, the pool level ought to be the same, but the individuals in here would vary. So now, kind of, again, we want to see a 2 to 3x coverage ratio. Let's use this. So we've done our calculations. One way to show this data is in what's called a heat map. And this is a heat map where each box, this box up here is one of the major giving development officers, Nancy Berrios. Her box is big because they're sized by the ask amount, and we know that she has 64 million in ask. That's why she's big, and she's colored green because she has a good coverage ratio. Her ratio of the ask to current year expected for her pool is up around 3, which is the bright green. The red is down around 0. So if I look at this, this communicates a lot. Here's my leadership giving group. Here's my VP of development group, the law school, the merit program. I see there's very big differences between the program. And one of our clients used this chart with his president to say, we're doing some stuff in process over here that's not being done in the satellite programs. And the result is we're getting a lot more asks and we're getting better coverage ratios than they are. And we ought to gang up and leverage what we're doing over here. And it caused a bunch of behavior and process and organizational shifts. Because in this case, the law program and the merit program, these little red means they're not getting much out. And what they're getting out is coming out at a low coverage ratio versus what you'd expect. In leadership giving, Nancy seems to be doing pretty well. John Brown has a big box, and so he's got like 40 million in ask out, but he doesn't have the same coverage ratio. So for some reason, his coverage ratio is less than you'd expect. So the question here is, what would possibly drive a poor coverage ratio? And there's a few things. Maybe John is under asking. He's maybe moving things through pretty well, but he could be asking more and he's leaving money on the table. That would be a discussion. Or the second thing sometimes we see is if you have a pool, this will often be with a vice president or senior management, it might be the pool's too big. So we have one case where the vice president was doing a great job of covering the middle part of his portfolio, which are big donors. But there were a handful of really top-rated donors that he wasn't able to get to. So it was a big red box. A lot of asks, but not good coverage. So the way to fix that was to move some of the middle-rated prospects off to other field officers, and he picked up the very top. So his pool actually went down substantially in numbers, but then he was able to get on the top-rated prospects, bring them in, and it was an overall win-win for the organization. Another reason you could have a poor coverage ratio is the rating's wrong. I mean, and that would be a discussion. You know something that the prospect research team didn't know, or something changed, and that's the kind of thing that would come out in these discussions. So these ratios in the red colors aren't good or bad by themselves. They just develop stories. The data tells stories that help you understand this and have these kinds of discussions. So now we're going to use this. So now we're pretend we're having a coaching session. Nancy's in. Nancy Berrios is one of our top field officers. She's got clicked her on the heat map. 208 prospects. She's got 29 asks out, or pending asks. The way this school does it, they can be pending in qualification or actually verbal or written. So it's what she's planning to put out this year. 29, worth $64 million, and her current year expected value is 28. So that's like really good. Let's look a little further. This is another way to look at it. This is telling the same story as the heat map. This is a bar chart which looks at her asked to current year expected ratio, which is 2.29 versus her peers. So it looks like a couple are better. It's a fall off, and there's a whole bunch here that aren't way below this goal line of 2. So she's great there. The proposal ask total, she's second. Somebody's got 80 million, she's at 64 million. And her current year expected amount, that's why she gets the good ratio. She's second on ask, and she's fourth in this, so she's got a great ratio. So this is all looking really good. Let's go a little further. Let's look at her pool. Well, here maybe we start getting some concerns, and we can show this graphically, or this chart just shows it. 4 prospects, $25 million one, a $10 million, 10. So she's got 4 prospects that are $50 million bucks, or 80% of her pool. If I look at them, this is where the expected value comes in. So 25 million ask. The expected value is far less than that. It's a 2 rated, which is 10 to 50 million, but it's a B affinity, so you can sort of see, and it's a plus liquidity. So sort of see the factors coming in here. This person is given 536, so some of the other numbers are coming in, but this looks high. The next one, Joan Meinhold, it's a 10 million ask. Looks like expected value. This looks high too. The capacity is good. This is okay, sort of okay, looking better, but tight. Here's one that looks really off. 10 million, a 660,000 expected. I'd want to have a discussion about this because the expected value is below the capacity range. Strong affinity. Something's going well here. So we're starting to drill in. We might now want to continue the discussion and look at are they moving. So this is another aspect of looking at the pool. This is called the bubble chart, and these are the different stages from qualification to pending close. And Nancy's, each of these circles is one of her prospects, an anticipated ask, and so the size is how big they are, and the color is where they are. And so this is age in months. So she's got a whole bunch of them that have been in qualification 4, 8, 12, in some cases 16 months. Nothing's moved past solicitation. And the ones that are in solicitation are all the small little ones. All the big ones are down here. And the gray is the rest of the group. So her performance here in moving these things is not as good as the rest of her team, and it's actually a trend line. I mean, this is everybody. This is her line. So this starts raising some concerns that she sees they have some very big ones out there that are high relative to the expected value, and they may be not moving as well. Now we can go into the giving. This is a chart that most of you would have if you have one of our projects up. It's the giving history. So I've got one. Here's the $25 million ask. Person gave nothing till 2009 and has been giving out a few $100,000 a year. So that's a good pickup, but that's a long way to go to 25 million, especially given some of the others. So discussion, and we want to just explore this and say, Nancy, is this reasonable? Maybe this should back down. Maybe this would move through faster. Maybe you want to go for a smaller, get this person up to 2 million now and then step up. Look at the 10 million ask. Here's this person's given strong 6-figure. A bunch back in time sort of fell off. Actually, nothing in 06 and 07 has been brought back. So this is going in the right direction, positive, but you might want to have a discussion with whether this is a stretch and so forth. Here's the next one. This is another pickup story. So there's a lot of good stuff here, but I'm a little concerned that while Nancy's got a good coverage ratio, when I go into the pool, it looks like maybe a little bit of elephant hunting and things getting stuck. So the last thing we want to look at as we examine and have this coaching session with Nancy Berrios is what we call a penetration ratio. So this is a little different. It's another concept, but we're trying to see how much of her pool she's actually approached and worked with in the last year. So we've seen she's got a lot of proposals, dollar value. She's got a good coverage ratio, but seems to be maybe elephant hunting a bit at the top end. This is looking at her penetration. So what we've done is we've created 5 levels. The first level is a prospect who has a proposal and has been visited. And out of her 208 prospects, 14 are in that category, or 6.7%. Has a proposal not visited, another 15. Visited in the last 12 months, but no proposal asked or anticipated ask, 29, 13.9%. Contacted, email, voice, whatever, and in some way other than a visit, 69 for 33.2%. So this totals about 61%, and then no proposal, no contact, the people that have not been penetrated, 38.9. That's not bad. We like to see this, so it's a 70% or up level. That's good prospect pool penetration. If you look at Nancy compared to everybody else in this team, she's much better. I mean, the team has 65%, so there's a lot of overassignment, and people aren't getting penetrated very deeply. This is a visual view of this chart, and so here each of this is called a spine plot. Each bar is a person. This bar right here is Nancy, and the width is how many prospects they have. Nancy has 208, so that's the width of her bar. You can quickly see in this visual that some of her peers have huge numbers compared to her, way too many prospects, and the coloring is showing how much of her pool, this being 100%, this being the target 70%, are penetrated level 1 to 4. 1 is blue and 4 is this gold. She's 61%, so she's a little under the target, but not bad. A couple of her peers are ahead of her. Unfortunately for this team, most of the team is running under 50% penetration, and they've got probably too many assignments. But we're seeing here, this is another measure of trying to look at pool effectiveness, and Nancy's actually getting out to her prospects. So her activity level and her penetration is pretty good. So just to summarize what we've looked at today, this was about expected value, but it kind of fits in this whole spectrum of things you want to look at with a field officer in a major giving program. And we talked about a number of things that run from how many prospects they have to visits to penetration to active proposals to this ask versus expected value to close rates. We also looked at moves through the pool. And I think as we close here, I would say that these are indicators and they're coaching tools. In this case, the data can help highlight and bring out stories. And the stories get the discussions, and the discussions get focus on what's important. And our clients who use this, I think one of the things they would all say is that the discussions have changed from, the top 4 prospects who they're working on and the big dinner they had last week to much more of a strategic discussion about the whole pool. Because it's very easy. Field officers are verbal, and they like to share stories about what's most recent in their mind. Where in reality, the most important discussion might well be the stuff that isn't recent in their mind that needs coverage. And these metrics and these tools like this bring it out. And this was about the expected value. That is a key metric, because back to the beginning, if someone has $10 million in ask outstanding, it's hard to know whether that's good or bad without knowing what level of prospects they have and how much they should be worth. And we went through an example and drew out some discussion, and that's what this is kind of all about. And we're doing right now a lot of work in this area. So if we're open for questions now, you can put your hand up on the go to webinar panel on the right, or just flip in and type in a question in either the question or the chat box, and we'll answer it. So we'll wait a couple of minutes here for questions to come in. I'll just talk a little bit more. As we look at benefits, it's these stories that come alive, and then out of those stories, we're finding, Sean Perry at William & Mary talked at our user group, and he's put out a couple of papers on how this has allowed him to get higher value proposals on average, more proposals than ever, over $1 million closed, move through the pipeline faster. All of these things can be improved because the team is understanding what's working, what's not, and this coaching tool is bringing out those discussions. So I've used the word coaching tool a lot, but I think that's really important. It's not, hey, you got to meet this metric. It's just showing a story. It's just telling a story that then needs to be vetted and discussed. So I'm not seeing any questions come in. If you have some, we're here. We're going to post this webinar, and we'll have it up in a few days. And you can always contact us, either support@advisorsolutions.com, or just, if you've got my name is Doug Cogswell, doug.cogswell@advisorsolutions.com, and I'd be glad to continue the dialogue. Thanks for the time. Appreciate it, and have a great day.